Joining us now, the one and the only Scott Rasmussen of ScottRasmussen.com, the number one poller. I've told you this in the United States. He's gotten everything right. Everybody's jealous of him. They don't know how he does it time after time again. And he's here. And this segment brought to you by the Job Creators Network. Let's get right to them. Scott, thanks. Sorry we're a couple minutes behind. Thank you for your patience, Scott, and thanks for being with us today, sir.
Always great to spend some time with you.
Oh, that's so nice of you, Scott, because you are the best. Your weekly pulse that came out, Democrats much more likely to want the government to control prices on things they buy. Your polling shows a majority of Democrats think the government should cap the price of airline tickets, gasoline, cars, auto parts, milk. What's the deal here?
Well, look, we found large segments of the population say if you ask somebody, hey, if you say to somebody, prices are going up on all these things, should the government put a cap on it? People say yes. Now, you got to remember, you're asking this question out of the blue. It's not anything they've really thought through because it's not a serious policy debate at the moment. And when you don't explain consequences or give people a moment to think through the consequences, of course they like the idea of having some kind of limit to how much they have to pay. People get frustrated with the cost of living. But these are the things, and one of the big challenges in polling is to distinguish between the fleeting reactions and more sustained discussion. If there was a serious proposal to cap the price of gasoline, say, and it was being debated, and the entire discussion began to focus on how that would lead to less gasoline. I remember the 1970s when we could only buy gas every other day. You would have these discussions. Positions would become more hardened, and support for these ideas would fall dramatically.
Look, I think that kind of sums it up right now, and you really nailed this, Scott, as always, because if you ask somebody, if the government can help you get a lower price for something, it's tough to say no. I'd rather the government not get involved and pay more, right? So,
right,
I mean,
right. And by the way, let me just give you just a point of comparison. The immigration debate has been very consistently discussed throughout the Trump administration. And we poll on one question every other week on it, or a couple of questions every other week on it, as we explore the understanding. And on that issue, opinions never change. 8 out of 10 people believe that legal immigration is good. 8 out of 10 people believe illegal immigration is bad, which means the majority see a significant difference between legal and illegal immigration. And those numbers have been thought through because people are discussing this issue all the time.
Then how do the Democrats plan to win in 2020 with a strategy of basically open borders, no wall, do nothing, keep the asylum laws as they are, and let thousands of people come in a day now? I mean, we had 1,000 people come in yesterday at one section overrunning a fence apprehended by Border Patrol. I mean, Democrats, obviously they got the same polling you have. They're doing something. How do they win with an open borders policy based on those polling numbers, Scott Rasmussen?
Well, what they want to focus on are the weaknesses, or what they see as the weaknesses in Donald Trump's approach. They know that building a wall is one of the less popular ways to restrict illegal immigration. They know that they can raise concerns about separating families at the borders and some kind of mean-spirited aspects to it. But at the end of the day, if their presidential candidate is committed in any way, shape, or form to an open borders policy, that's going to hurt them. And we see the same thing in a whole range of issues. I've called these some of these advocates the 20%ers. Some of the Democratic presidential nominees are advocating policies that are supported by 20% or less of the American population, and obviously that's not a winning combination.
The 20%ers. I'm going to tweet that out right now, if you don't mind, and tag you on that. Scott Rasmussen saying that we've got Democrats running for president that he calls the 20 percenters, candidates who are taking positions that are supported by 20% of the American people. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, well, you've got the idea to ban private health insurance companies. Very, very little support for that, consistently under 20%. You've got the idea for universal basic income. People believe very strongly that anybody who's willing to work should be able to find a job, and they want a system that provides that kind of security, and by and large, they think we have it. But on the other hand, only 11% think that if you're unwilling to work, the government should be supporting you.
We're with Scott Rasmussen, by the way. This segment brought to you by the Job Creators Network. I'll get to that in a minute. More information, you can go to scottrasmussen.com, scottrasmussen.com. Scott, I went to your polling last evening, as I do about 3 times a week, and I was shocked because what you did is nobody else has done this. Look, people, this is why this is the best pollster in America. Go to scottrasmussen.com. Scott, I don't want to embarrass you and make your head big, but you are the best. For instance, no one else has done this poll, which is head-to-head matchups against various Democratic candidates. So in a field of 100, right, in a field of the blind, the one-eyed man, Joe Biden, is king, right? But when you start doing matchups, look at some of these polling numbers. In head-to-head matchups, ElizabethWarren beats Biden 41% to 39%. Warren beats Sanders 40% to 37%. I mean, her campaign, she's like the policy wonk of all time. She got 100 policies. Explain that poll, and does it really show that the Biden polling results, are they kind of soft when we see it in the totalitarian? Explain that, Scott.
Well, yeah, first of all, we did a whole series of matchups, and I would call all of them essentially toss-ups. I mean, a 2-point lead with nearly 20% undecided and a little bit of a margin of error is a tie. But Warren and Biden would be tied in a head-to-head matchup. The reason I started asking this question is we've been hearing a lot about, well, the reason the progressive candidates aren't doing so well is there's so many of them, and Joe Biden kind of has the closer to the center lane all to himself. So we decided to test it. If the Democratic race comes down to 2 people, who would you vote for? And I think what we're seeing is Joe Biden is the unifying force. People in the Democratic Party know him. They're comfortable with him. Older voters in particular are comfortable with him. Bernie Sanders has a core group of support, not clear that he can expand beyond it. And then you've got the rest of the field is wide open. The Democratic Party is going to try and winnow down the field very aggressively. They just put out new rules for their 3rd debate, which I think will get us down to 7 or 8 candidates by the end of the summer who are on the debate stage. And then as you begin to go forward, people will be seeing an entirely different choice. As for what it means about Joe Biden, really simple. Let's wait and see what happens in the first 2 or 3 debates. Biden is going to be on stage with 20 other candidates. He'll be on with 9 others the first night, and then he'll be watching as 10 others the next night challenge him. And we'll see how he responds. If he looks like he can survive the debate stage and all those attacks, well, then he might end up being the nominee. But if he shows any kind of weakness, yes, there is a softness to these numbers that could easily change the results.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. We are with Scott Rasmussen, one of the top pollsters in the United States. You can read more every day. Want to sign up for his newsletter? Go to scottrasmussen.com. scottrasmussen.com. This is the one poll you need to go to. Also, he's got his stat of the day, his number of the day that comes out at 8 a.m. And 64 years ago today, I just saw, Scott, that is when a number of schools started desegregation. So it's a fun site. Go to scottrasmussen.com. Scott, what's your Twitter handle?
At Scott W. Rasmussen.
At Scott W. Rasmussen. Follow him there, at Scott W. Rasmussen. And this segment brought to you by the Job Creators Network. Go to freedomtowork.com, freedomtowork.com. Scott, the move towards socialism. Last week we talked about the fact that 50% of millennials say they like to live in a socialist country. And since you were on last week, I mean, we have had that debate all week. I even had it with my 2 older children who are millennials in the family, trying to figure out, what the hell are you people thinking? course, he got mad at me because he doesn't put himself in that category, so he kind of cut me off. But any more elaboration on that with his booming economy and with more jobs and people and kids getting out of college and getting good jobs? Why on earth would they want to change our system?
Well, and I think one of the big mistakes that conservatives make when they hear this idea that there's growing support for socialism is they think that the people who like socialism think the same thing they believe socialism means. It turns out that most people who say they like socialism do not believe it is an economic system. They do not believe it is an alternative to capitalism or free markets. In fact, about 8 out of 10 people who say they like socialism like free markets. And I know this is it's really hard to get used to the idea that the meanings of words can change. I actually spoke to a group in Phoenix a couple of days ago, and I told them that for me, the definition, the meaning of middle age has changed from what I thought it was 30 years ago. That's part of life. And socialism has now come to mean something else, a little bit of more community control, closer to home, not more government, but more empowerment of individuals. It has come to mean fairness. It certainly has some connotations to ending racial discrimination, but it is not perceived by most people as an economic ideology. And let me give you a sense of scale with all of this, and I think this is the part of the conversation that gets to the real essence of the challenge. There's about 12% of voters, 1 out of 8, who believe that socialism is an economic ideology and they still like it. So it's only 12% who believe that the historic understanding of socialism is a good thing. And there's only 15% who believe that socialism is a threat to America's founding ideals, to our commitments to freedom and things. And that group, all that 15% believe it's a threat and they think it's good for that reason. So really we're talking about 12 to 15% of the population who think that socialism is good as we conservatives would understand it. The rest, another 20 or 25%, think they like socialism but think it means something entirely different. And there's an awful lot of common ground to connect with people on.
Well, look, that makes a lot better sense when you frame it that way. Kind of a lot of people's, like when I talk to millennials about this, you're right. I mean, the sense I get is not as an economic system, but they're looking for social justice. This seems to be the new word now that a lot of the Democrats have been using, social justice. And I guess what that means is, I don't know what it means. I guess equal pay for equal work or something. But that's, I mean, have you heard that term bantered around? And I guess that's interpreted in a lot of different ways, right?
Yeah. And, when we make all of these assumptions about words and terms, without giving any thought to the fact that in the culture they assume that once a word goes out into the culture, it takes on a life of its own. And you just said you're not sure what somebody means by is it equal pay for equal work or is it something else? Well, probably it's different to everybody who has the views that they like socialism. And again, I emphasize a lot of people that say they like socialism actually share a lot of views that you hold. And so if you get beyond the word socialism and start talking about policies, that's when you find the common ground.
All right, I've got to get to very serious issues, and we've only got 2 minutes, but middle age, you intrigued me with this. Okay, Scott, so I'm 61. I still consider myself middle-aged, but actually my son says, no, you're like 1 year from a senior citizen where you can get 10% off at the Golden Corral. Am I middle-aged or am I old? 61.
Well, since I'm 63, I think you're still young.
Thank you. Right? Even though I get the 10% off at Golden, whatever it is, that all-you-can-eat buffet, was that Golden Corral or whatever. Yeah, that's it, 10%. When I'm 62, I get 10% off. I can't wait. Scott, daily generic ballot. You look at the economy, it's booming, everything going great. And then you look at your poll, daily generic ballot, Democrats 41%, Republicans 36%. And you say, how can Republicans be 5 points behind in this booming economy?
Well, for one thing, there's a long way to go until the election. For another, Democrats always lead in the early generic ballot polling. But primarily what this is telling us is things haven't shifted all that much since election night 2018. Democrats won the popular vote by about 8 points. They had a little bit of voter intensity. And, this is going to be a shock to you, but most Americans have other things going on in their lives other than living and breathing politics every day. Unless there is a major upheaval, those numbers aren't likely to change too much until we get into the 2020 campaign cycle. If the economy goes south before the next election, well, then those numbers are going to look a lot worse for Republicans. If the economy continues to do well and the Republicans can find a way to take credit for it, to connect their policies to that economic growth that we're enjoying, well, then the numbers might get a little bit closer. But it is something that I think is etched in stone, at least for the next several months.
Let me read you a comment here from Kiera, our producer. Text me. I'm in D.C. She's in Portsmouth. She says, John, social justice is geared more towards people of color, like police brutality, systematic racism, environmental prejudice. I used to produce and host a show all about social injustices and also the bail system, which I happen to be an advocate of getting rid of cash bail. I think it's an asinine system that favors the wealthy getting out of jail easier. But I guess that's when you talk about social justice, it's more on racial.
I think that's a huge component of it. Absolutely.
All right. Well, we're out of time for this segment, and you got to go. You got to sign up. Go to scottrasmussen.com. You got to get his newsletter every day. It comes right to your inbox. Plus, you got all kinds of great things. This is really a great website, Scott, that you've got. It really is my favorite one. I love the new thing you have, like the historic fact of the day, the number of the day that comes out. So like at 8 a.m., I go to, what's his number today? It's just fun. I love that. You wouldn't think it matters, but it's kind of a fun thing, and you have a very creative mind. ScottRasmussen.com. This segment brought to you by the Job Creators Network. Go to freedomtowork.com, freedomtowork.com.